The church fell silent as Rebecca stared at the tarnished silver band nestled in velvet. Her mother's name, Elizabeth, was engraved inside. Impossible, yet there it was. The same ring Michael had promised was lost forever after the accident. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, illuminating tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied makeup. 4 years of rebuilding trust, of letting go of suspicions, suddenly collapsed like a house of cards. "I can't," she whispered, barely audible to the confused guests. Michael's face drained of color as recognition dawned. He knew exactly what she'd found. Will she walk away from the man she loves? Or will confronting the truth behind her mother's ring reveal secrets that could heal wounds deeper than betrayal? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had begun with such promise. Rebecca stood in the church's bridal suite as her bridesmaids fluttered around her like butterflies, adjusting her veil and smoothing invisible wrinkles from her ivory gown. Through the window, September sunlight bathed the garden in golden warmth, the perfect wedding day she had meticulously planned for 18 months. "Something's missing," Sophia said, her oldest friend and maid of honor, stepping back to assess Rebecca's appearance. They both knew who was missing. Elizabeth. 5 years gone, and still her absence felt like a physical void in the room. "She would have loved this dress," Rebecca said, running her hands over the delicate lace. "Bodice." She could almost hear her mother's gentle laugh, could almost feel her fingers adjusting the veil, just as she had for countless ballet recitals and graduation ceremonies throughout Rebecca's childhood. Rebecca glanced at the wedding program on the vanity. The names listed under family of the bride were sparse. Just her father, James Martin, who would walk her down the aisle with his military posture and kind eyes that never quite recovered from losing his wife. "It's time," her father said, appearing at the doorway. His voice caught slightly as he saw her. "You look just like—" "I know, Dad." Rebecca cut him off gently, unable to hear the comparison to her mother without risking her carefully applied makeup. James offered his arm, and as they positioned themselves at the church entrance, Rebecca caught sight of Michael at the altar. Her soon-to-be husband looked uncharacteristically nervous, tugging at his collar and exchanging whispered words with his best man, Thomas. Michael's parents sat in the front pew, his father, Robert, looking uncomfortable in his formal suit, and his mother, Eleanor, impeccably poised as always, though something in her expression seemed strained. The wedding coordinator gave her signal, and Rebecca began her journey down the aisle to Pachelbel's canon. Each step brought her closer to her future, to the man who had helped her rebuild her life after her mother's death. Michael's face brightened when he saw her, though she noticed him swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing with apparent anxiety. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Pastor Williams asked when they reached the altar. "I do," her father said, placing Rebecca's hand in Michael's before taking his seat. The ceremony proceeded according to plan. The readings, the prayers, the promises of forever. Rebecca barely registered the words until they reached the exchange of rings. "The rings, please," Pastor Williams said, turning expectantly towards Thomas. Thomas patted his pockets with theatrical panic before producing a small velvet box with an exaggerated sigh of relief that drew chuckles from the guests. He handed it to Michael with a strange glance that Rebecca couldn't quite interpret. "Rebecca," Michael said, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands, "I give you this ring as a symbol of my love and faithfulness." He opened the box, and for a moment, time stood perfectly still. Instead of the simple diamond band they had chosen together at the jeweler's 6 months ago, there lay a tarnished silver ring with intricate engravings along its surface. Rebecca recognized it instantly, the ring her mother had always worn, the family heirloom that had disappeared after her death. With trembling fingers, she lifted it from the box, turning it to see the inside, where she knew her mother's name. would be inscribed. There it was, Elizabeth, just as it had always been. The church suddenly felt airless. Rebecca's vision tunneled until all she could see was the ring and Michael's increasingly pale face. "This is my mother's ring," she said, barely above a whisper. "How do you have this?" Michael's lips parted, but no words came out. In the front row, his mother shifted uncomfortably, her knuckles white, as she gripped her purse. "You told me it was lost," Rebecca continued, her voice gaining strength as confusion gave way to anger. "You helped me search for it. You told me to let it go." Pastor Williams cleared his throat uncertainly. "Perhaps we should—" "I can't," Rebecca said, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Her father half rose from his seat, his expression a mixture of concern and something else. Was it guilt? "Rebecca," Michael finally found his voice, reaching for her hand. "Please, I can explain." But the perfect day had unraveled completely. The wedding program fluttered to the floor as Rebecca backed away from the altar, the tarnished silver ring clutched tightly in her palm. Everything she thought she knew about Michael, about their relationship, about the past 5 years, suddenly seemed built on quicksand. "How long have you had this?" she demanded, no longer caring about the 200 pairs of eyes watching their private moment implode. "Rebecca, not here," Michael pleaded. "Let's talk privately." Eleanor Thornton stood now, her authoritative presence drawing attention. "Michael," she said sharply, "this is hardly the time or place. When would be a better time to explain why my fiancé has been hiding my dead mother's ring?" Rebecca shot back, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. The church fell into shocked silence. Pastor Williams looked desperately toward the wedding coordinator, who seemed equally at a loss. Thomas shifted awkwardly beside Michael, while Sophia moved protectively closer to Rebecca. "Everyone, please!" Rebecca's father stood, addressing the stunned guests. "We need a moment. Please, bear with us." As the murmuring grew louder, Rebecca met Michael's eyes. The man she thought she knew better than anyone looked back at her with the expression of a stranger with secrets that somehow connected to the mother she had lost and the ring she had searched for so desperately. "The vestibule," she said quietly. "Now." The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and despair. Rebecca clutched the visitor badge clipped to her blouse, her thumb absently tracing the embossed date, October 17th, a day that would forever divide her life into before and after. "Ms. Martin?" A doctor approached, his scrubs wrinkled from what must have been a long shift. His name badge read Dr. Michael Thornton, though in her exhaustion she barely registered it. "I'm handling your mother's case." Rebecca nodded mechanically. She'd been at the hospital for 36 hours straight, leaving only once to shower and change clothes before returning to her vigil. "The swelling in her brain isn't responding to treatment, as we'd hoped," he said, his voice gentle but direct. "I think you should prepare yourself." Elizabeth Martin had been crossing the street when a delivery truck ran a red light. The impact had thrown her 20 feet. The doctors initially spoke of miracles and fighter spirits, but their optimism had faded with each passing day. "Can I see her?" Rebecca asked. Dr. Thornton led her to the ICU room, where her mother lay connected to a constellation of machines. Elizabeth looked small against the white hospital sheets, her vibrant personality reduced to beeping monitors and fluctuating lines. Rebecca took her mother's hand, careful to avoid dislodging the IV. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm here." To her surprise, Elizabeth's eyelids fluttered open. Recognition sparked briefly in her gaze. "Rebecca," she said, her voice so faint it was barely audible over the equipment. "Don't try to talk, Mom. Save your strength." Elizabeth's fingers twitched, and with evident effort, she twisted the silver ring she always wore. "This," she managed. "Yours now." "Mom, please." "Important," Elizabeth insisted. "Promise. Keep it safe." Rebecca nodded, tears blurring her vision. "I promise." Dr. Thornton checked the monitors. making notes on his tablet. His presence faded into the background as Rebecca focused entirely on her mother. Over the next 3 days, Elizabeth drifted in and out of consciousness. During her lucid moments, she spoke of the ring repeatedly, extracting promises from Rebecca to never part with it. The ring had been in their family for generations, she said, though she never elaborated on its history. On the 4th day, Dr. Thornton found Rebecca in the hospital cafeteria, staring blankly at an untouched cup of coffee. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Rebecca nodded, grateful for the company after endless hours of solitude. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," he said, stirring sugar into his own coffee. "Most patients with her injuries wouldn't have held on this long." She's always been stubborn," Rebecca replied, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. Something about Dr. Thornton's presence was comforting. Unlike the other medical staff who treated her with clinical sympathy, he seemed genuinely invested in her mother's case. He explained the medical terminology in ways she could understand, never rushing despite his obvious workload. 2 nights later, Elizabeth Martin passed away peacefully in her sleep. Rebecca had stepped out for just 15 minutes to change clothes, returning to find the room filled with a different kind of silence. Dr. Thornton was there, his expression somber, as he confirmed what she already knew. In the haze of grief that followed, Rebecca realized something was missing. The silver ring was no longer on her mother's finger. "Where is it?" she asked the nurse, who was disconnecting the equipment. "Her ring, it's gone." A search of the room yielded nothing. Security was called, reports were filed, but the ring had vanished. Rebecca was inconsolable, having failed in the last promise she had made to her mother. Dr. Thornton, Michael, as he had asked her to call him, stayed well past the end of his shift, helping with the search and comforting Rebecca. "I'll keep looking," he promised. "Someone must have seen something." In the days that followed, as Rebecca made funeral arrangements and sorted through her mother's belongings, Michael checked in regularly. What began as updates about the missing ring evolved into coffee meetings, then dinners, then something more. Michael was steady, reliable, everything Rebecca needed as she navigated her grief. He continued searching for the ring, filing police reports and checking pawn shops. It was probably a hospital employee, he theorized one evening, 6 months after Elizabeth's death. These things happen more often than people realize. By then, Rebecca had begun to heal. The sharp edges of her loss had softened, though the missing ring remained a painful reminder of her broken promise. "Maybe it's time to let it go," Michael suggested gently after a year of fruitless searching. "Your mother would want you to move forward." Rebecca resisted at first, but eventually conceded. "The ring was lost forever," Michael assured her. "And while she couldn't fulfill that last promise to her mother, she could honor her memory by living fully." 2 years to the day after Elizabeth's death, Michael proposed. Rebecca said yes, never suspecting that the foundation of their relationship was built on secrets hidden beneath compassionate smiles and reassuring words. The police report lay open on Rebecca's kitchen table, its official language reducing her mother's cherished heirloom to one silver band antique with engraving. Case number 479823, filed by Officer Jenkins. Status: ongoing. Ongoing was a polite fiction. 3 months after Elizabeth's death, the investigation had yielded nothing. "They're not looking anymore," Rebecca said, pushing the report away. "They just haven't officially closed the case." Michael sat across from her, his hospital shift completed hours ago, yet he'd come straight to her apartment rather than going home to sleep. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his attention remained fixed on her. "I've been asking around the hospital," he said. "Someone must have seen something." Rebecca had come to rely on Michael's steady presence. What had begun as a doctor's compassion for a grieving daughter had evolved into something neither of them had expected. He'd been there through the funeral, through sorting her mother's belongings, through the fog of grief that made simple tasks like grocery shopping seem insurmountable, and he'd been tireless in the search for the ring. "I went to 3 more pawn shops today," Rebecca said, sliding a list toward him. 37 shops checked, each one crossed off methodically. "Nothing." Michael studied the list. "We'll try the next county tomorrow." "You don't have to do this," Rebecca said, though they both knew she wouldn't stop searching. "I want to help," he replied simply. The search consumed Rebecca's thoughts. She placed ads in local papers, created flyers with a detailed description and the promise of a reward, and spent weekends combing through flea markets and estate sales on the slim chance the ring might surface. 6 months after Elizabeth's death, Rebecca received a call from a pawnshop owner in Fairfield, 40 miles away. "I might have something matching your description," the man said, his voice gravelly over the phone. Heart pounding, Rebecca called Michael immediately. He rearranged his shift and drove her to Fairfield that afternoon. The shop was cramped and dimly lit, glass cases displaying a jumble of jewelry, watches, and silver items of dubious provenance. The owner, a balding man with nicotine-stained fingers, placed a small velvet tray on the counter. "This came in last week," he said, pointing to a tarnished silver band. Rebecca's hands trembled as she lifted it, turning it to check the inside. No inscription. The pattern was similar, but not identical to her mother's ring. "It's not the one," she said, disappointment crushing her momentary hope. Back in the car, she broke down. Michael held her as she sobbed, her grief fresh and raw once again. "We'll keep looking," he promised, stroking her hair. But as weeks turned into months, the search yielded nothing but dead ends. Rebecca began to dream of the ring. Nightmares, where she saw it clearly but couldn't reach it, or where her mother appeared, disappointed in her failure to keep her promise. 1 year after Elizabeth's death, Rebecca sat surrounded by her mother's photographs, the anniversary making her melancholy. Michael arrived with takeout and a bottle of wine. "I spoke with the detective again," he said carefully, setting the food on the coffee table. "He thinks it's time to consider that the ring might never be found." "I promised her," Rebecca said, her voice small. Michael knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Your mother wouldn't want you to put your life on hold forever. The ring was important to her because of what it symbolized: family, continuity, love. Those things don't disappear just because the ring is gone." His words made sense, though they did little to ease her sense of failure. Still, in the months that followed, Rebecca gradually reduced her search efforts. The police officially closed the case. The flyers came down. The list of pawn shops was tucked away in a drawer. "Maybe it's time to let it go," Michael suggested gently, 18 months after the ring's disappearance. "Not the memory, not the promise, but the search." Rebecca resisted at first, but Michael was patient, helping her see that honoring her mother meant more than endlessly searching for a material object. "Lost forever," he said one evening, holding her close. "But what matters is that you carry her with you, ring or no ring." Slowly, painfully, Rebecca accepted this truth. She created a small memorial shelf with her mother's photographs, including one where Elizabeth wore the ring. It was a compromise with her grief, acknowledgement that some losses couldn't be recovered. As Rebecca's heart healed, her relationship with Michael deepened. He remained her rock, the person who understood her pain without requiring explanations. When he proposed 2 years after they met, Rebecca said yes without hesitation, believing she had found someone who would never hide truths from her, who would never break promises. The search for the ring had ended, but Rebecca never suspected that the answers lay much closer than she had ever imagined, hidden behind the compassionate eyes of the man who had helped her look for it all along. Time seemed suspended in the church as Rebecca stood frozen, her mother's ring clutched in her palm. The metal felt impossibly warm against her skin, as though it carried some essence of Elizabeth still. Behind her, 200 guests shifted uncomfortably in the pews, their collective murmuring growing louder with each passing second. Michael's handwritten vows peeked from his breast pocket, words he'd labored over for weeks, now rendered meaningless by the small silver circle that had materialized like a ghost between them. "Rebecca," he whispered, his voice strained. "Please, let me explain." The pastor cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to proceed with the ceremony that had veered so dramatically off script. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess," he suggested, his eyes darting between the bride and groom. Rebecca finally found her voice. "Yes," she said, the single word carrying a weight of confusion and betrayal. "I need a moment." Michael reached for her hand, but she stepped back, holding the ring up between them like a shield. "Not here," she said. "Somewhere private." Her father appeared at her side, his military bearing giving him an authority that parted the concerned bridal party. "The vestibule," he suggested quietly. Rebecca nodded, turning to address the bewildered congregation. "Please excuse us for a few minutes," she managed, her voice remarkably steady despite the tremors running through her body. "We need to resolve something." Sophia stepped forward, touching Rebecca's arm. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," Rebecca said. "Just keep everyone calm if you can." She moved down the aisle, aware of Michael following a few steps behind. The heavy wooden doors of the vestibule closed behind them with a resounding thud, shutting out the murmurs of their guests. "How long?" Rebecca demanded, turning to face him. "How long have you had this?" Michael ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disrupting it in a way that would have seemed endearing just hours earlier. Now it only emphasized his discomfort, his guilt. "Rebecca, No," she cut him off. "No more evasions. I want the truth, Michael, all of it." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I received it last week," he said finally. "From my mother." "Your mother?" Rebecca stared at him incredulously. "Your mother had my mother's ring all this time." Michael nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," Rebecca said, her voice rising despite her efforts to maintain composure. "Why would your mother have my mother's ring? Why would you let me search for years if you knew where it was? Why would you lie to me about something that meant so much?" "I didn't know," Michael said quickly. "Not at first, I swear. When we were searching, I had no idea. But you found out," Rebecca pressed. "When?" Michael hesitated, and in that pause, Rebecca saw the truth. "Years," she realized, cold certainty washing over her. "You've known for years." "I wanted to tell you," he said, desperation creeping into his voice, "but it was never the right time. And then too much time had passed, and You what? Thought you'd surprise me at our wedding?" Rebecca asked incredulously. "What exactly did you think would happen when I saw this ring? That I'd be delighted to discover you've been lying to me?" "I thought it could be a symbol," Michael said, reaching for her hands again. This time she didn't pull away, too stunned by his explanation. "A symbol of healing, of bringing the past into our future." Rebecca laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Healing? Michael, this feels like the opposite of healing." The vestibule door opened, and Rebecca's father stepped in, his face grave. He froze when he saw the ring in Rebecca's hand, his complexion paling visibly. "Dad!" Rebecca said, noticing his reaction. "Did you know about this?" James Martin's silence was answer enough. "Oh my God," Rebecca whispered, looking between the two men. "You both knew. Who else? How many people at our wedding are in on whatever?" "The secret is—" "Rebecca, please," her father began. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "Because right now, I think my fiancé and my father have been hiding something about my mother from me. Something tied to this ring that she made me promise to keep safe." Michael and James exchanged a glance that confirmed Rebecca's suspicions. There was more, much more, that they weren't telling her. "I deserve the truth," she said quietly, her anger giving way to a deep, aching hurt. "Both of you, all of it. Now." Before either man could respond, the vestibule door opened again. Eleanor Thornton stood in the doorway, her elegant posture belying the tension in her voice. "Michael," she said sharply, "the guests are getting restless. Whatever this misunderstanding is, surely it can wait until after the ceremony." Rebecca turned to face her almost mother-in-law, holding up the ring for her to see. "Did this belong to you, Mrs. Thornton?" Eleanor's carefully composed expression faltered for just an instant, long enough for Rebecca to know that the web of secrets extended even further than she'd imagined. Eleanor's composure returned with practiced swiftness. "I don't see how that's relevant right now," she said, her voice cool and measured. "We have guests waiting." Rebecca held her ground. "I'm not continuing this ceremony until I understand why my mother's ring was in your possession." Michael stepped between them, his back to his mother. "Eleanor, please," he said quietly. "Give us a moment." The older woman's lips thinned, but she retreated, closing the vestibule door with measured restraint. "Rebecca," Michael began, "I only learned about the ring a few months ago." "That's not what you just said," Rebecca countered. "You said you received it last week, but you've known for years." Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, but Rebecca had glimpsed the screen, a text notification from T that read simply, "Keeping the secret." "Who's texting you about keeping secrets on our wedding day?" she demanded. Michael paled. "It's nothing, just Thomas being—" "Stop lying to me." Rebecca's patience finally snapped. "Every word out of your mouth right now feels like another lie." "Fine," Michael said, running his hands through his hair again. "I found out 3 years ago that my mother had the ring. She told me after we got engaged." Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. 3 years? We've been engaged for 3 years, and you never thought to mention that your mother had the ring I spent months searching for. The ring that meant everything to my mother." "I didn't know how to tell you," Michael said. "My mother said it would only complicate things, that it was better left in the past." "What past? What complications?" Rebecca looked to her father, who had been suspiciously quiet. "Dad, what do you know about this?" James Martin looked trapped, his eyes darting between Michael and his daughter. "Rebecca, honey, there's history between our families. History that predates you." Rebecca's mind raced. "You knew the Thorntons before I met Michael at the hospital?" Her father nodded reluctantly. "We all knew each other many years ago. So when I brought Michael home for the first time, introduced you to Dr. Thornton, who had been so kind after Mom died, you already knew exactly who he was." Rebecca's voice rose with each word. "And neither of you thought that was worth mentioning." "It was complicated," her father repeated lamely. "Stop saying that," Rebecca exploded. "Complicated is a work schedule. Complicated is deciding between chicken or fish for the reception. This," she held up the ring, "this is deception." Michael's phone buzzed again. This time Rebecca snatched it from his pocket before he could stop her. "Rebecca, don't—" he began, but she was already reading the message thread. "Everything okay? Eleanor looks ready to implode. T. Need extraction? T. Are you keeping the secret or coming clean?" "Thomas knows too," Rebecca said flatly. "Who else? The whole wedding party? The entire congregation?" "It's not like that," Michael insisted. "Thomas only knows because he's my best friend. I had to talk to someone about this." "Someone other than your fiancé, apparently," Rebecca said bitterly. She handed back the phone. "Start talking, Michael. The full truth this time." Michael hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "I found the ring in my mother's jewelry box when I was looking for my grandmother's cufflinks. It had your mother's name engraved inside. When I confronted her, she admitted she'd had it for years, and you didn't immediately tell me. Bring it to me, return what rightfully belonged to my family. My mother said it had belonged to our family. At first," Michael said quietly, "that your mother took it." "That's a lie," Rebecca said instantly. "My mother would never steal anything." "I'm just telling you what she told me," Michael said defensively. She said there was bad blood between our families, that the ring was part of that history. Rebecca turned to her father. Is that true? James looked pained. There was a disagreement years ago between the families. A disagreement, Rebecca repeated flatly. About what? Business matters, primarily, her father said vaguely, and personal issues that grew from those matters. So you all knew each other, had some kind of falling out. And then what? My mother happened to die under the care of a doctor from this family you had a disagreement with, and nobody thought this coincidence was worth mentioning. Michael flinched. It wasn't a coincidence, he admitted. I recognized your last name when you came into the hospital. I knew who your mother was. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Rebecca's feet. You deliberately inserted yourself into my life, knowing who I was, who my mother was. It wasn't like that, Michael protested. I was assigned to your mother's case by chance. But yes, I recognized the name. I was curious at first, but then I genuinely cared about her case, and about you. So, when we started dating, when I fell in love with you, was that part of your curiosity too? No, Rebecca, I love you. That has always been real. But built on lies, she said, her voice hollow. You helped me search for the ring, for months. Years, knowing all along that your mother had it. I didn't know then, Michael insisted. I swear, when we were searching, I had no idea. I only found out later. But you said nothing. For 3 years you said nothing. Rebecca looked down at the ring in her palm, the tarnished silver catching the light. And then you decided to surprise me with it at our wedding. What were you thinking? I thought it could symbolize healing, Michael said weakly. A new beginning, Rebecca laughed bitterly. A new beginning built on years of deception. The vestibule door opened again, this time revealing Sophia. She took in the scene, Rebecca's tear-streaked face, Michael's desperate expression, James's guilty stance, and instantly moved to Rebecca's side. What's happening? She asked. The guests are getting really restless. Apparently, Rebecca said, her voice steadier than she felt. There's a lot more to this wedding than I realized. Sophia took in the charged atmosphere of the vestibule, her protective instincts immediately engaging. Do you need me to tell everyone to go home? She asked Rebecca quietly. Before Rebecca could answer, the wedding coordinator, Melissa, bustled in with a tablet clutched to her chest. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. The guests are getting very restless, and the caterers need to know if they should proceed with dinner preparations. Give us a minute, Michael said tersely. Melissa hesitated, looking between the bride and groom. It's been almost 20 minutes already, she said delicately. Perhaps I could make an announcement that there's been a slight delay. Rebecca nodded, suddenly aware of the spectacle they were creating. Yes, tell them. Tell them we're handling a family matter. As Melissa retreated, Sophia pulled Rebecca aside. What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. Rebecca opened her palm, revealing the ring. Michael's had my mother's ring all this time. Well, his mother has. And apparently our families have some kind of history that everyone decided I didn't need to know about. Sophia's eyes widened. Wow. She glanced at Michael, who was engaged in a heated, whispered conversation with his father. Actually, that might explain something. I saw Michael and his mother having an intense discussion right before the ceremony. She handed him something small. I'm guessing it was that ring box. You saw that and didn't mention it? I thought it was just pre-wedding jitters, Sophia defended. Maybe a family heirloom being passed down. I had no idea it was connected. To your mom. Rebecca rubbed her temples, trying to process the cascade of revelations. Who else is in on this? How many people at our wedding knew about this secret past between our families? Sophia pulled out her phone and showed Rebecca the wedding guest list she'd helped compile. Your side has about 80 people, mostly friends from college and work, plus your dad's military buddies and some distant cousins. Rebecca studied the Thornton side of the list with new suspicion. She recognized most names: Michael's immediate family, colleagues from the hospital, friends from medical school. But there were several older couples she'd met only briefly during engagement parties, people Michael had introduced vaguely as family friends. These people, Rebecca pointed to a cluster of names: the Carlsons, the Wexlers, the Barringtons. Michael said they were old family friends, but they always seemed uncomfortable around me. Come to think of it, Sophia said slowly, at your engagement party, I overheard Mrs. Barrington asking someone if James knew about the wedding. I assumed she meant your dad, but it seemed odd at the time. The vestibule door opened again, and Michael's brother David entered. Unlike Michael's obvious distress, David appeared calm, almost resigned. The natives are getting restless, he said, his attempt at humor falling flat. Mum sent me to smooth things over, I guess. Did you know too, Rebecca demanded, about the ring, about our families? David hesitated, then nodded. Some of it, not everything. Unbelievable, Rebecca muttered. Is there anyone who doesn't know more about my life than I do? David approached her cautiously. Look, Rebecca, whatever's happened, whatever you've learned, maybe today isn't the time to unpack it all. You have 200 guests out there, a reception venue waiting, and don't, Rebecca cut him off. Don't try to manage me into proceeding with this wedding as if nothing has happened. I'm not, David said, hands raised in surrender. I'm just suggesting that maybe you could postpone the bigger conversation until after you've addressed your guests. As much as Rebecca hated to admit it, he had a point. The immediate problem was the church full of people waiting for a ceremony that might not happen. Fine, she said after a moment. I'll go speak to the guests. She moved toward the door, but Michael stepped in front of her. Rebecca, please, let's just take a few minutes to talk privately. We can sort this out. Sort it out? Rebecca echoed incredulously. Michael, you've had years to sort this out. Years of watching me grieve not just my mother, but the loss of her ring. The one thing she specifically asked me to keep safe. And instead of telling me the truth, you let me believe it was lost. Forever. Michael flinched at his own words thrown back at him. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I love you, Rebecca. That's never been a lie. I don't even know what's real anymore, Rebecca said, brushing past him. The main church doors felt impossibly heavy as she pushed them open. 200 faces turned toward her, expressions ranging from concern to curiosity to outright impatience. The organist, who'd been playing soft background music to fill the awkward delay, abruptly stopped. Rebecca took a deep breath and walked halfway down the aisle, aware of Sophia and Michael following at a distance. Her father moved to stand beside her, offering silent support despite his role in the deception. Thank you all for your patience, Rebecca began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. I apologize for the delay. Something unexpected has come up. She almost laughed at the inadequacy of those words, and I need to ask for your understanding. She glanced back at Michael, whose face was a mask of barely contained anguish, then at his mother, whose expression remained impressively impassive. The ceremony will be postponed, Rebecca continued, ignoring the gasps and murmurs. I'm sorry. For the inconvenience, especially for those who've traveled a long way to be here. If you'll bear with us, we'll figure out the next steps. As the murmuring grew louder, Rebecca turned away from the crowd, her decision made. I need to go, she whispered to Sophia. Now! Sophia guided Rebecca through the side door of the church, shielding her from curious eyes as they retreated to the bridal suite. The small room, which hours earlier had been filled with laughter and champagne toasts, now felt like a sanctuary from the chaos Rebecca had unleashed. Here, Sophia said, handing Rebecca a glass of water. Drink this. Rebecca sank onto the velvet settee, still clutching her mother's ring. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to its size, as though it carried the burden of secrets spanning decades. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered, staring at her reflection in the antique mirror. The woman looking back at her, in an exquisite gown, with carefully styled hair now coming loose, seemed like a stranger. "What do you want to do?" Sophia asked, practical as always. "I can start calling people, explaining, well, something. Or I can just take you home." Before Rebecca could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Sophia moved to answer it, opening the door just enough to see who was there. "Now is not a good time," Rebecca heard her say firmly. "I need to speak with her." Eleanor Thornton's authoritative voice brooked no argument. "Alone?" "Absolutely not," Sophia began, but Rebecca interrupted. "It's okay," she said, straightening her spine. "Let her in." Sophia hesitated, then stepped aside with obvious reluctance. "I'll be right outside," she promised, shooting Eleanor a warning look before closing the door. Eleanor Thornton stood just inside the room, impeccable in her pale blue mother-of-the-groom ensemble. Unlike Michael, whose emotions played across his face like scenes on a screen, Eleanor's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Well," she said after a moment, "this is quite the situation you've created." "That I've created?" Rebecca repeated incredulously. "I'm not the one who's been hiding family secrets for years." Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Family matters are complex. Some things are better left undisturbed." "Not when they concern my mother," Rebecca countered. "Not when they've made my entire relationship with Michael a lie." "Don't be so dramatic," Eleanor said dismissively. "Michael loves you. That's hardly a lie. But he knew who I was from the beginning. He deliberately sought me out at the hospital." "He was assigned to your mother's case," Eleanor corrected. "Yes, he recognized the name, but the rest was coincidence." Rebecca stood, unwilling to remain at a physical disadvantage. "Why did you have my mother's ring?" "She valued it above almost anything else. She made me promise to keep it safe before she died." Eleanor's composure faltered slightly. She opened her handbag, searching for something, and the purse slipped from her grasp, spilling its contents across the floor. Rebecca knelt automatically to help gather the items: lipstick, compact keys, wallet, when a photograph caught her eye. It was old, the colors faded, the edges worn. Three young people stood arm in arm, laughing at the camera. With a jolt, Rebecca recognized her mother, younger than Rebecca had ever known her, perhaps in her early 20s. Beside her stood a younger version of Eleanor, and between them a handsome young man with his arms around both women. "That's my father," Rebecca said, stunned. "With you and my mother." Eleanor snatched the photo from Rebecca's hand. "That's private." "Not anymore," Rebecca said, her voice hardening. "Tell me the truth, Mrs. Thornton. How did you know my mother? Why do you have her ring? What are you all hiding from me?" For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing, simply staring at the photograph in her hand. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. "Elizabeth and I were friends once," she said quietly. "Best friends. From childhood through college." "Best friends?" Rebecca repeated, trying to reconcile this with her mother's complete silence about the Thorntons. "That's impossible. She never mentioned you. Not once." "No, she wouldn't have," Eleanor agreed with a bitter smile. "Not after what happened." "Which was what exactly?" Eleanor sighed, smoothing her skirt as she perched on the edge of the settee. "We were inseparable growing up. Our families were close, vacationed together, celebrated holidays together. When we went to college, it was natural that we'd be roommates. That's where we met James, your father." Rebecca stared at the photograph again, at the carefree young faces. "My parents never told me any of this. As I said, family matters can be complicated." Eleanor's gaze drifted to the ring in Rebecca's hand. "That ring belonged to my grandmother. It was meant to stay in the Thornton family." "Then why did my mother have it?" "Because," Eleanor said carefully, "for a time she was going to be a Thornton." The implication hung in the air for several heartbeats before Rebecca understood. "My mother was engaged to someone in your family?" "To my brother, Robert," Eleanor confirmed. "They were in love, or so we all thought. The ring was his grandmother's, given to him to present to his bride. Rebecca sank back onto the settee, trying to process this revelation. But she married my father instead. Yes, Eleanor said, her tone making it clear that this was where the true conflict began. She chose James, rather abruptly, I might add. And the ring? She kept it, Eleanor said flatly. Claimed Robert had given it to her as a gift, not conditional. On marriage, my family disagreed. Rebecca shook her head in disbelief. My mother wouldn't steal something that valuable. If she kept it, she must have had a reason. We all have reasons for the things we do, Eleanor said. It doesn't make them right. The door opened and Sophia peered in. Everything okay in here? Fine, Rebecca said automatically, though nothing felt remotely fine. Your father's looking for you, Sophia said. And Michael. Eleanor stood, smoothing her already immaculate outfit. Think carefully, Rebecca. Some secrets, once revealed, can't be put back. Is that really what you want on what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life? As she moved to leave, Rebecca called after her. I want the truth. All of it. Not just your version. Eleanor paused at the door. Then perhaps you should ask your father. He has as much to answer for as anyone. Rebecca paced the bridal suite, her wedding dress rustling with each turn. Eleanor's revelations had only raised more questions, leaving her with a fragmented puzzle of her mother's past. I can't believe it, she said to Sophia, who sat watching, and her with concern. My mother was engaged to Michael's uncle before she married my father, and no one ever thought to mention this? It's bizarre, Sophia agreed, tapping away at her phone, but I might have found something. There's an old newspaper article about a property dispute between the Martins and the Thorntons from about 30 years ago. Rebecca leaned over Sophia's shoulder to look at the screen. The article was brief, mentioning a legal battle over a vacation property co-owned by the two families. The details were sparse, but it confirmed at least part of Eleanor's story. The families had indeed been close once. A knock at the door interrupted them. James Martin entered, his face drawn with worry and what Rebecca now recognized as guilt. Rebecca, he began, I know you must have questions. Understatement of the century, she replied, gesturing for Sophia to give them privacy. Sophia squeezed Rebecca's hand as she left. I'll keep looking into this. Call if you need me. Once alone, Rebecca faced her father. Tell me about the cottage, she said, deciding to start with what she knew for certain. James looked surprised, then resigned. So Eleanor told you about that? She mentioned a shared vacation property. Sophia found an article about a legal dispute. Her father sighed heavily, loosening his tie as he sank into a chair. The lakeside cottage. It had been in the Thornton family for generations, but they ran into financial trouble in the late 80s. My father, your grandfather, helped them out by buying half the property. For 20 years our families shared it, spent summers there, together. That's where Mom met Robert? James nodded. Elizabeth spent every summer at that cottage from when she was 12. She and Eleanor were inseparable, and Robert was always around. It seemed inevitable they'd end up together. But they didn't, Rebecca pressed. She chose you instead. A ghost of a smile crossed her father's face. I was the outsider. I met your mother during her senior year of college. I was a young lieutenant then, stationed nearby. We met at a coffee shop off campus. His expression softened at the memory. It wasn't love at first sight or anything dramatic. We just connected. And what about her engagement to Robert? James's smile faded. That's where things get complicated. Robert and Elizabeth had been dating for years, and everyone, including Elizabeth, assumed they'd marry eventually. But when he formally proposed, something changed. She realized she didn't love him the way she should, the way she deserved to love someone she'd spend her life with. So she broke it off and returned the ring, right? Rebecca asked, already suspecting the answer. Not exactly, James admitted. She told Robert she needed time to think. During that period, We met and started seeing each other. When she finally broke off the engagement, it was messy. The Thorntons felt betrayed, especially Eleanor, who'd always seen Elizabeth as a sister. And the ring! James glanced at the tarnished band, still clutched in Rebecca's hand. Robert gave it to her when he proposed. When she tried to return it, he told her to keep it, said it was hers regardless of her answer. But after she broke things off, the family demanded it back. Elizabeth refused, saying Robert had given it to her without conditions. "That doesn't sound like Mom," Rebecca said, trying to reconcile this story with the mother she'd known. She wasn't materialistic or spiteful. She wasn't keeping it out of spite, James corrected. She kept it because shortly after the breakup, she found a deed to the cottage in Robert's papers, a deed transferring full ownership to the Thorntons, despite my father having paid for half. The Thorntons were planning to sell the property without compensating our family, so she kept the ring as, what, collateral? As leverage, initially, James explained. But then things escalated. The Thorntons filed a lawsuit claiming sole ownership of the cottage based on some technical loophole. Your grandfather fought it, but he was already ill by then. The stress worsened his condition. Understanding dawned on Rebecca. Grandpa Martin died during the lawsuit, didn't he? James nodded solemnly. Heart attack right in the courtroom. After that, your mother refused to return the ring on principle. It became a symbol of everything the Thorntons had taken from our family, the cottage, her friendship with Eleanor, and ultimately your grandfather's health. Rebecca turned the ring over in her palm, seeing it with new eyes. What she had treasured as a simple family heirloom was actually a battlefield relic from a war between families. The court eventually ruled in the Thorntons' favor, James continued. We lost the cottage, along with the money your grandfather had invested in it. But Elizabeth kept the ring, her one small victory. And you never told me any of this because your mother wanted to protect you from all that bitterness, James said softly. After you were born, she insisted we leave the past behind. Us. She never spoke of the Thorntons again, and I respected her wishes. Until I brought Michael home, Rebecca said, the pieces finally clicking into place. And you recognized him as a Thornton. James Martin's shoulders slumped, the weight of decades of silence finally taking its toll. Yes, he admitted. I recognized the Thornton name immediately when you mentioned Michael. At first, I thought it had to be a coincidence. Thornton isn't that uncommon a name. But then you showed me his picture, and you still said nothing, Rebecca said, her voice tight with disbelief. You let me fall in love with him, get engaged to him, plan an entire life with him, all while knowing who he was. I thought about untelling you, James defended weakly. But you were so happy, Rebecca, happier than I'd seen you since your mother died. How could I take that away from you? By being honest. Rebecca stood, her wedding dress billowing around her. You could have told me the truth and let me make my own decision. Instead, you let me walk into this blindfolded. James reached for a folded document in his inner jacket pocket, yellowed with age, the creases worn from repeated handling. There's more you need to understand, he said, offering her the paper. Rebecca took it with reluctance, unfolding what appeared to be court documents. The heading read, Martin vs. Thornton, civil case, administrative 237. As she scanned the contents, phrases jumped out at her. Fraudulent business practices, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional misrepresentation. What is this? She asked, though the answer was becoming clear. The lawsuit wasn't just about the cottage, James explained. Your grandfather and Robert's father had started a business together. Real estate development. The cottage was just the beginning. They had plans to develop the entire lakefront area. Rebecca continued reading, her confusion growing. This says Grandfather Martin invested his life savings in the company. James nodded grimly. Nearly $500,000. Everything. He had. George Thornton was supposed to match the investment, but instead he used your grandfather's money to clear his personal debts and then claimed the business had failed. When your grandfather discovered the deception, the Thorntons produced documents showing he'd signed off on everything, documents that your grandfather swore were forgeries. So this wasn't just about Mom breaking an engagement, Rebecca said slowly. This was about theft, fraud. The Thorntons maintained their innocence, James continued, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that your grandfather had known the day. Risks. The court case dragged on for years. By the time it was over, your grandfather was dead. The Thorntons had the cottage and most of their assets sheltered under corporate entities, and both families were left with nothing but bitterness. Rebecca sank back into her chair, trying to process this new information, and Mom kept the ring as... what? Compensation. Justice, James corrected. Or the closest thing to it she could manage. The ring was worth a fraction of what the Thorntons had taken, but it was something they couldn't get back. A reminder that they hadn't won completely, so when Michael appeared in our lives, I was terrified, James admitted. I recognized him not just from his name, but from his resemblance to Robert. I thought he might be using you, somehow, continuing the feud into the next generation. Did you confront him? James looked away, guilt written across his features. Not immediately. I watched and waited, trying to determine his intentions. When it became clear that he genuinely cared for you, I made a deal with him. A deal, Rebecca repeated flatly. What kind of deal? We met privately, about a month after you introduced us. I told him I knew who he was, knew about the history between our families. He claimed he'd only learned the details after meeting you, that he'd been curious about the Martin name, asked his parents, and they told him the bare minimum. And you believed him? Not entirely, James admitted, but he swore his feelings for you were genuine. He said he'd fallen in love with you before he knew the whole story, and by the time he did, it was too late. He couldn't bear to lose you. So what was this deal? James sighed heavily. I agreed not to tell you about the past if he promised to keep you away from his family, especially his parents. I wanted to protect you from their influence, from potentially being used as some form of revenge. That's why we always spent holidays with you, Rebecca realized. Why we only saw his parents at formal occasions, always in public. Yes, James confirmed. Michael agreed it was better to keep the past buried, but Eleanor never truly accepted the arrangement. She tolerated you, but I could see she never forgave your mother, never stopped seeing you as Elizabeth's daughter. And the ring, Rebecca asked, holding up the tarnished band. How did Eleanor get it after Mom died? James paled visibly. I don't know, he said, his voice strained. The ring was on your mother's finger in the hospital. After she passed, when we were collecting her belongings, it was gone. We assumed it had been stolen, but it found its way to Eleanor Thornton, Rebecca said bitterly. What a remarkable coincidence. Rebecca, James began hesitantly, there's one more thing you should know. About Michael. What about him? When I confronted him about his family, told him I knew who he was, he said something I've never forgotten. James met his daughter's eyes directly. He said he'd recognized your mother in the hospital before he ever met you, said he'd taken special interest in her case because of it. Rebecca stared at her father, the implications of his words sinking in like stones in water. He recognized Mom before he met me. What are you saying? That he deliberately targeted her as a patient? Before James could answer, the door opened and Michael stood in the threshold. He'd removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, his formal appearance as disheveled as the day's events. May I come in? He asked quietly. James stood, placing a protective hand on Rebecca's shoulder. I'm not sure that's... It's okay, Dad. Rebecca interrupted. I need to hear what he has to say. She nodded toward the door. Could you give us a few minutes? James hesitated, then reluctantly moved toward the exit. As he passed Michael, he paused. She knows everything now. he said, a warning in his tone. When the door closed, Michael remained standing, maintaining a careful distance between them. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Rebecca broke it. "Did you recognize my mother in the hospital before you met me?" Michael closed his eyes briefly, as if he'd been expecting this question, but still wasn't prepared for it. "Yes," he admitted. "I saw her name on the patient roster when I started my shift. Martin isn't a unique surname, but something made me check her chart. When I saw her first name was Elizabeth, I knew." "You knew she was the woman who'd broken your uncle's heart and supposedly stolen a family heirloom," Rebecca filled in bitterly. "The woman your family blamed for ruining them." "That's what I'd been told growing up," Michael acknowledged. "My family's version of the story painted your mother as manipulative, someone who used people and discarded them. And yet you took special interest in her case," Rebecca pressed. "Why?" "Revenge. Curiosity." Michael moved to the window, looking out at the church gardens where guests were now milling about in confusion. "At first it was curiosity," he admitted. "I'd heard about Elizabeth Martin my entire life. She was like a family ghost, someone we never discussed directly, but whose presence haunted every family gathering. I wanted to see this woman for myself. So you used your position as a doctor to what? Spy on her?" "No," Michael said firmly. "I reviewed her case because of the name, yes. But once I was involved, I was her doctor first and foremost. I gave her the best care I could. I swear that to you." Rebecca studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "And then what? You just happened to be there when she died, happened to meet me, happened to fall in love." Michael pulled a small leather journal from his pocket, hesitating before offering it to her. "I started keeping this after I met your mother. It might help you understand." Rebecca took it cautiously, opening to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The entry was dated 5 years earlier, October 19th. "Elizabeth Martin died at 2:17 this morning. Her daughter was out of the room. I was there. In her final moments she was lucid, looked right at me and said, 'You're one of them, aren't you? A Thornton.' I couldn't lie to a dying woman, so I nodded. She smiled, actually smiled, and said, 'Tell them I'm sorry about the cottage, but the ring is my daughter's now. It always should have been.' Then she closed her eyes and was gone. I don't know what to make of this. The Elizabeth Martin in that bed wasn't the villain from family stories. She was just a mother, worried about her daughter until the very end." Rebecca looked up, stunned. "She knew who you were." Michael nodded. "She recognized something in me. Maybe my resemblance to my uncle. I never told anyone about that conversation, not even my family." "But you told them she was dead," Rebecca said. "And somehow the ring disappeared from her finger and ended up with your mother." "I didn't take the ring," Michael said firmly. "When I returned to her room with you, it was already gone. I assumed another staff member had removed it or that. It had been placed with her belongings. Conveniently," Rebecca muttered, flipping through more pages of the journal. October 25th. "Met with Elizabeth's daughter again. Rebecca. She's devastated, obviously, but there's a strength in her that reminds me of descriptions of her mother in her youth. She's searching for her mother's ring, convinced it was stolen. I'm helping her file reports, check pawn shops. Mother would be furious if she knew. I haven't told her about Elizabeth's death or meeting Rebecca. I'm not sure why I'm keeping it secret, except that it feels private somehow, like something that belongs just to me." November 30th. It's been over a month of helping Rebecca search for the ring. I should tell her who I am. I know I should. But every time I try, I see the way she lights up when I arrive, how she trusts me, and I can't bear to become another person who's betrayed her. I'm falling for her, which wasn't supposed to happen. This was curiosity, maybe closure, but not. This December 24th, Mother found out I'd been seeing Rebecca Martin. The fight was epic. She called it a betrayal, said I was spitting on my family's suffering. I tried to explain that Rebecca isn't responsible for the past, that she doesn't even know about it. Mother said that's even worse, that I'm living a lie, building a relationship on deception. She's right, of course, but it's too late to walk away. I love her. Rebecca closed the journal, unable to read more. When did your mother tell you she had the ring? 3 years ago, Michael said. After we got engaged, she was furious about the engagement and tried to talk me out of it. When that didn't work, she told me she'd recovered what belonged to our family. She wouldn't say how she got it, just that justice had finally been served. And you said nothing to me, Rebecca said, her voice flat with disbelief. You watched me plan our wedding, all while knowing your mother had the one thing my mother had specifically entrusted to me. I was wrong, Michael said simply. I told myself I was protecting you, that revealing the truth would only cause you pain. But I was really protecting myself, protecting what we had built together. He moved closer, kneeling before her. I tried to get the ring back from her repeatedly, but she refused. It was only last week that she finally relented. Why? Why after all this time? Because I gave her an ultimatum, Michael said. I told her either she return the ring and make peace with our marriage, or I would tell you everything and cut ties with the family. She chose to return the ring, but on her terms, as a wedding gift that would symbolize her acceptance of you. Into the family. How generous, Rebecca said sarcastically, and the surprise reveal at the altar? Michael winced. That was my idea. I thought it could be a moment of healing, of coming full circle. Obviously I was wrong. Rebecca set the journal aside, her mind whirling with the fragments of a past she'd never known existed. The revelation that her mother had recognized Michael as a Thornton in her final moments added yet another layer to this complicated history. I need to understand all of it, she said finally. Not just your perspective, or my father's, or your mother's. I need to see the whole picture. Michael nodded, relief flickering across his face at her willingness to listen. What do you want to know? Everything, Rebecca said. Start with the business partnership. What really happened? Michael leaned against the wall, gathering his thoughts. The story I grew up with was that your grandfather and my grandfather had been friends since college. They started a real estate development company in the 80s, Thornton Martin Developments. The plan was to buy lakefront property cheaply and develop it into vacation homes. The cottage was the first purchase, Rebecca added, remembering her father's explanation. Yes, but it was meant to be just the beginning. They had plans to develop the entire northern shore of Lake Windermere. Your grandfather put up most of the initial capital. His life savings, Rebecca interjected. Michael nodded grimly. My grandfather was supposed to match it, but our family was already in financial trouble. There was a bad investment, gambling debts. The details were kept from us kids, but the result was that my grandfather used the company funds to pay off personal creditors. He stole my grandfather's money, Rebecca said flatly. Michael winced but didn't contradict her. When your grandfather found out, he threatened legal action. My grandfather panicked and produced documentation claiming the money had been properly invested but lost due to market conditions. Paperwork, your grandfather insisted, was forged. And the court believed your grandfather. The court never definitively ruled on the forgery allegations, Michael said carefully. The case dragged on for years. Corporate law was different then, and my grandfather had structured things in a way that made it difficult to separate business losses from fraud. Rebecca remembered the yellowed newspaper clippings Sophia had found. But this tore the families apart. Not just the business partners, but everyone. It was brutal, Michael agreed. My mother and your mother had been best friends since childhood. The lawsuit destroyed that friendship, and then there was the engagement between my mother and your Uncle Robert. They'd been together since high school, Michael confirmed. Everyone assumed they'd get married eventually. The ring had been my great-grandmother's, one of the few valuable heirlooms our family had left. And then my mother met my father and broke things off. Rebecca filled in. The timing couldn't have been worse, Michael said. Right in the middle of the lawsuit, Elizabeth broke her engagement to Robert and started seeing your father, a complete outsider to both families. My uncle was devastated. My mother felt betrayed. The Martins saw it as Elizabeth's personal choice. The Thorntons saw it as another betrayal. And the ring became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Rebecca said, understanding dawning. Exactly. In my family's version of events, Elizabeth kept the ring out of spite, as a final insult after taking their money and breaking Robert's heart. In your family's version, Mum kept it as the only justice she could get after your family stole my grandfather's life savings and then contributed to his death, Rebecca finished. Michael ran a hand through his hair. 2 families, 2 versions of the same events, and 30 years of bitterness between them. Rebecca thought about the wedding guests milling about outside, many of whom apparently knew more about her family history than she did. How many people know about this feud? In this town? Probably most of the older generation, Michael admitted. It was quite the scandal at the time. There were newspaper articles, gossip. Small towns have long memories. So I'm the only one who didn't know, Rebecca said bitterly. Everyone at our wedding, your family friends, even some of my father's friends, they all knew we were from feuding families, and no one said a word. Most people assumed you knew, Michael said gently. They thought our relationship was some kind of reconciliation between the families. Rebecca laughed without humor. A reconciliation built on lies and secrets. I'm so sorry, Michael said, his voice breaking slightly. I should have told you years ago. I was afraid of losing you. Did you ever think that by keeping these secrets, you were guaranteeing that very outcome? Rebecca asked, her anger giving way to exhaustion. Before Michael could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Sophia poked her head in, her expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but the situation out there is getting complicated. The caterers are demanding to know whether to proceed with dinner, and some of the older guests are getting quite worked up. I think some old wounds have been reopened. Of course they have, Rebecca muttered, rising from her seat. This wedding didn't just bring 2 people together, it reunited 2 families with decades of resentment between them. Michael straightened as well. What do you want to do? Rebecca looked down at her wedding dress, then at the ring still clutched in her hand. I need to think. I need space. I can't make any decisions right now, not when my entire understanding of my life, my mother, my relationship, everything has been turned upside down. I understand, Michael said, though the pain in his eyes was evident. Rebecca turned to Sophia. Can you take me home? Not to the apartment Michael and I share. To my father's house. Of course, Sophia agreed readily, as Rebecca gathered her things. She paused, looking back at Michael. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I don't know if I can trust anything anymore. The diamond engagement ring sat abandoned on the vanity, its brilliance dulled in the fading afternoon light. Rebecca had placed it there when she first entered the bridal suite, intending to wear it again after touching up her makeup. Now, it seemed to belong to another life entirely, a life built on half-truths and carefully maintained illusions. You don't have to decide anything right now, Sophia said, helping Rebecca gather her belongings. Everyone will understand if you need time. Rebecca laughed hollowly. Will they? Because from what I've learned today, it seems like half our guests came to this wedding expecting some sort of dramatic reconciliation between feuding families. A reconciliation I knew nothing about. Sophia squeezed her friend's shoulder. What can I do to help? I need to address the guests before we leave, Rebecca decided. They deserve some kind of explanation, even if I don't have all the answers yet. Michael had left the bridal suite, giving her the space she'd requested. As Rebecca changed from her wedding gown into the simple sundress she'd worn to the church that morning, she tried to make sense of the cascade of revelations. Her mother's ring, the family feud, Michael's deception, her father's complicity. Each new piece of information felt like another crack in the foundation of her life. "Ready?" Sophia asked gently when Rebecca emerged from the changing area. "As I'll ever be," Rebecca replied, clutching both rings, her mother's silver band and the diamond engagement ring, in her palm. They made their way back to the main church, where most guests remained, either too invested in the unfolding drama or too polite to leave without formal dismissal. Conversations hushed as Rebecca entered, all eyes turning toward her. She spotted Michael near the altar, conferring with his brother David. Her father stood awkwardly near the front row, while Eleanor Thornton sat rigidly in her designated seat, her expression inscrutable. Rebecca moved to the center of the aisle, conscious of her casual attire and the absence of her veil and train. She cleared her throat and the remaining murmurs died away. "Thank you all for your patience," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "As you've probably gathered, something unexpected happened during the ceremony. I discovered that my mother's ring, a family heirloom that disappeared after her death, was in the possession of the Thornton family." A ripple of reaction moved through the congregation. Some guests looked confused, while others, particularly the older ones, exchanged knowing glances. "What many of you apparently already know, but I did not," Rebecca continued, unable to keep the edge from her voice, "is that the Martins and the Thorntons have a complicated history, a history that both families chose to keep from me, even as Michael and I planned to build a life together." She held up the tarnished silver band. "This ring has been at the center of a decades-long dispute between our families. It represents broken trust, broken promises, and broken hearts. Today, it also broke what I thought was the most honest relationship in my life." Michael stepped forward, pain evident in his expression, but Rebecca shook her head slightly, and he reluctantly retreated. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience this has caused all of you," she continued, addressing the guests. "The reception venue has been notified, and they've agreed to donate the food to local shelters. Your gifts will be returned as soon as possible." Eleanor Thornton rose from her seat. "Rebecca, dear," she said, her voice carrying the false warmth she'd perfected over years of social occasions. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate forum for family matters. Why don't we discuss this privately?" "That's exactly the problem, Mrs. Thornton," Rebecca replied evenly. "These family matters have been discussed privately for too long. Behind my back, without my knowledge. I'm done with secrets." Several older guests shifted uncomfortably. An elderly man Rebecca recognized as one of her father's longtime friends shook his head sadly. "Just like Elizabeth," he muttered, audible in the church's perfect acoustics. "Stubborn to a fault." The comment stung, but it also strengthened Rebecca's resolve. "I may be like my mother in many ways," she acknowledged, "but unlike her, I won't spend the next 30 years letting this conflict define my life." She turned to face Michael directly. "I need time to process everything I've learned today. I need to understand who I am in light of this history I never knew existed." "I understand," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "Take all the time you need." Rebecca nodded, grateful for at least this small consideration. "The wedding is postponed indefinitely," she announced to the guests. "Thank you for coming, and again I apologize for the circumstances." With that, she turned and walked back down the aisle, conscious of the weight of both rings in her hand, and the weight of decades of family history on her shoulders. Sophia followed close behind, car keys already in hand. As they passed through the church doors into the late afternoon sunlight, Rebecca paused, looking back at the building where her life had been irrevocably altered. The ivory satin gown hung, abandoned in the bridal suite. The carefully selected flowers adorned pews, now gradually emptying of confused guests. The unity candle remained unlit. "Let's go," she said to Sophia, turning away from the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life. In the parking lot, Eleanor Thornton's voice called after them. "Rebecca, this isn't over." Rebecca didn't turn around, didn't pause in her stride towards Sophia's car. "You're right about that, Mrs. Thornton," she called back. "It's only just beginning." As they drove away from the church, Rebecca stared out the window at the familiar streets of her hometown, wondering how many other secrets lay hidden behind its charming facade. The diamond engagement ring and the tarnished silver band clinked together in her palm. The future she'd planned and the past she'd never known, now inextricably intertwined. The key to Elizabeth's studio hung on a hook in James Martin's kitchen, untouched for 5 years. Rebecca stared at it, this small piece of brass that had once unlocked her mother's private sanctuary, a converted carriage house at the back of her father's property where Elizabeth had painted and sketched and found solace from the world. "You're sure you want to go in there?" her father asked gently. I haven't changed anything since she died." "That's exactly why I need to go," Rebecca replied, taking the key from its hook. "I need to be somewhere that's purely Mom, untouched by all these secrets and lies." James nodded in understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." Rebecca slipped out the back door and crossed the garden that her mother had once tended with such care. In the years since Elizabeth's death, James had maintained it as best he could, though it lacked her artistic touch. The path to the carriage house was lined with lavender, now overgrown, but still fragrant in the early evening air. The key turned stiffly in the lock. The door creaked open, releasing the scent of oils and turpentine, paper and dust, the unmistakable smell of her mother's creative space. Rebecca stood on the threshold, momentarily overwhelmed by the preserved tableau of Elizabeth Martin's final projects. An unfinished canvas rested on the easel, a landscape of Lake Windermere, the same lake where the contentious cottage had stood. Brushes still sat in jars of cloudy solution, waiting for a hand that would never return to them. Sketches were pinned to corkboards, reference photos clipped alongside them. A coffee mug, long dry, sat on the workbench, a faded lipstick mark on its rim. Rebecca moved through the space reverently, trailing her fingers over the surfaces her mother had touched. She'd avoided this studio after the funeral, finding the preserved creative energy too painful to confront. Now she was grateful for her father's decision to leave it untouched. On the far wall hung a gallery of finished works, Elizabeth's personal favorites that she'd kept rather than sold or gifted. Rebecca studied them with new eyes, noticing details she'd overlooked before. Several depicted the same lakeside scene from different angles and in different seasons. The cottage, she realized. Her mother had continued painting the lost property years after the court battle, preserving it in oils and watercolors. A large wooden filing cabinet stood in the corner, its drawers labeled in Elizabeth's flowing script. Commissions, exhibits, references, and most intriguingly, personal. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before pulling open the bottom drawer marked personal. Inside were sketchbooks, journals, and folders of papers, all meticulously organized, with her mother's characteristic attention to detail. One folder was labeled simply Eleanor. Rebecca's heart quickened as she withdrew it and carried it to the faded armchair by the window, her mother's thinking spot, where she'd often found Elizabeth staring out at the garden, planning her next artistic endeavor. The folder contained letters, dozens of them, dating back to the 1970s, when Eleanor and Elizabeth were schoolgirls. The early correspondence was light-hearted and innocent, stories of summer adventures, school gossip, dreams for the future. As the years progressed, the letters grew more mature, discussing college plans, career aspirations, and eventually, relationships. A letter from Eleanor dated 1985 practically vibrated with excitement. "Lizzie, I knew Robert would propose this summer. The ring is perfect. Grandmother always said it would be yours someday. I can't believe we'll officially be sisters. Mother is already talking about a double wedding next year after I graduate. Can you imagine?" The Thornton sisters, walking down the aisle together. "The cottage renovations are coming along beautifully. Dad says, once the business with your father takes off, they'll build us each a house on the property. Our children will grow up together just like we did, running wild around the lake every summer. I can't wait to see you next weekend. Bring the ring. I want to see it on your hand. Love always, Ellie. Rebecca sat back, trying to reconcile this affectionate Ellie with the cold, formal Eleanor Thornton she'd known. The next letter in the chronology was from Elizabeth to Eleanor, apparently a draft that had never been sent. Dear Ellie, I don't know how to write this letter. I've started and stopped a dozen times. There's no easy way to say it. I can't marry Robert. I care for him deeply, but not in the way a wife should love her husband. We've been together so long that I convinced myself this was what I wanted, what was expected. But I've met someone who's shown me what real love feels like. I know this will hurt you and Robert and both our families. I know the timing is terrible with everything happening between our fathers, but I have to be honest before it's too late. I'm returning the ring. It belongs in your family. I hope someday you can forgive me. Love always, Lizzie. But the ring had never been returned. Instead, it had remained on Elizabeth Martin's finger for decades, a silent rebuke to the family that had allegedly stolen her father's future. Rebecca continued through the correspondence, finding a painful gap of several years following her mother's broken engagement. Then, surprisingly, a series of unsent letters from Elizabeth to Eleanor, dating from the late 1990s through the early 2000s. Ellie, Rebecca started kindergarten today. She has your smile, did you know that? The same way your whole face lights up when you laugh. I saw a photo of your son in the local paper, the science fair winner. He has Robert's eyes. Sometimes I wonder if our children would have been friends in a different world. The ring sits in my jewelry box. Some days I think about returning it, but then I remember my father's face in that courtroom, and I can't bring myself to extend an olive branch your family would likely burn. I miss you still, after all this time. Lizzie. The most recent letter was dated just a month before Elizabeth's accident. Dear Eleanor, I received my diagnosis yesterday. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. Not enough time to make amends for a lifetime of stubbornness, perhaps, but enough to try. The cottage is long gone. Our fathers are both gone, and we've wasted 30 years on a feud that consumed much of our lives. I'm sending this letter along with the ring. It belongs with your family, as it always should have. My only request is that someday when the time is right, you give it to Rebecca. Not as a Thornton heirloom reclaimed, but as a reminder that some things are more important than pride and old grievances. And I hope it's not too late for forgiveness. With love, still, Elizabeth. Rebecca's hands trembled as she read the final letter. Her mother had intended to return the ring before she died, but the accident had happened before she could send it. And somehow, in the hospital, Eleanor had taken back what she considered rightfully hers, without honoring Elizabeth's final wish that it eventually come to her daughter. The Thornton estate stood on the north side of town, a sprawling Victorian house set back from the road behind wrought iron gates and mature oak trees. Rebecca had visited only a handful of times during her relationship with Michael, always for formal occasions, where her interactions with his family had been carefully choreographed and superficial. Now, as she drove through the open gates, the morning after her abandoned wedding, she saw the property with new eyes. This wasn't just Michael's family home. It was a place deeply intertwined with her own history, a stage where much of the drama between the families had played out decades before her birth. She parked her car beside Michael's in the circular driveway, noting the presence of his father's sedan as well. Good. She wanted all the principal players present for this conversation. Before she could reach the front door, it swung open. Eleanor Thornton stood in the entryway, her expression a careful mask of polite surprise. "Rebecca," she said, her tone betraying nothing. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Rebecca replied. "I would think after yesterday you'd be expecting me." Eleanor stepped aside, gesturing for Rebecca to enter. Michael is in the study with his father. I assume you'd like to speak with all of us." The interior of the house was as Rebecca remembered, tastefully decorated in a traditional style, with family photographs arranged precisely on side tables and mantels. She followed Eleanor through the foyer and down a hallway to the study, where Michael and his father Robert sat in tense silence. Michael rose immediately when she entered. "Rebecca," he said, relief evident in his voice, "I wasn't sure when I'd see you again." "We need to talk," she said simply. "All of us." Robert Thornton remained seated, his resemblance to Michael striking despite the 30-year age difference. This was the man who had once been engaged to her mother, whose heart Elizabeth had broken when she chose James Martin instead. "Please sit," Robert said, gesturing to an empty armchair. "I understand we have much to discuss." Rebecca remained standing, reaching into her bag to withdraw the folder of letters she'd discovered in her mother's studio. "I found these yesterday," she said, addressing Eleanor directly. "Letters between you and my mother, spanning decades, including one written shortly before her death, saying she intended to return the ring to your family." Eldinor's composure slipped momentarily, surprise flickering across her features. "Letters. Elizabeth kept our correspondence." "She kept everything," Rebecca confirmed, "including drafts of letters she never sent. One explaining why she couldn't marry Robert, one asking for reconciliation years later, and the last one revealing she had terminal cancer and wanted to make amends before it was too late." The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation settled over them. Michael moved to Rebecca's side, though he maintained a respectful distance. "May I?" he asked, indicating the folder. Rebecca handed it to him. "Read them. All of you should read them. They tell a very different story than the one I've been hearing." As Michael began to review the letters, Eleanor moved to a bookshelf and removed a large leather-bound volume. "While you were discovering your mother's archives, I was reviewing our own family history," she said, opening the book to reveal an elaborate family tree spanning several generations. "The Thorntons and the Martins," Eleanor continued, pointing, "two interconnected branches of the tree, have been associated for over a century. Your great-grandfather and Michael's great-grandfather were business partners in the lumber industry in the 1920s. Our grandmothers were college roommates. This feud between our families is just one chapter in a long, intertwined history." Rebecca studied the meticulously documented genealogy, seeing her own name connected to Michael's with a dotted line labeled "Engaged 2020-2025. "You've already updated it," she noted, touching the notation. "Mother is nothing if not thorough," Michael said dryly, looking up from the letters. Robert cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology. We all do. The feud between our families, a conflict that began before you were born, should never have been kept from you, especially once you and Michael became serious." "Why was it?" Rebecca asked directly. "Why maintain the secrecy when it was obvious who I was, who my mother was?" "Pride," Eleanor admitted, closing the family tree book. "Stubborn, foolish pride. When Michael first told us he was dating Elizabeth Martin's daughter, I was opposed. I saw it as a betrayal of our family's suffering. The ring was a symbol," Robert added, "of everything we'd lost. Not just a business or property, but relationships, trust, the future we'd planned. So when my mother died and the ring disappeared from her finger at the hospital," Rebecca began. Eleanor, at least, had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I was there," she confessed. "Not by coincidence. When I heard Elizabeth had been hospitalized, I went to see her one last time to try to, I don't know what, make peace perhaps. But she was unconscious, and then, afterward, I saw the ring. I took it. I told myself I was reclaiming what belonged to our family, without knowing that my mother had already decided to return it," Rebecca said. "Without honoring her final wish that it eventually come to me." "I didn't know," Eleanor said quietly. "About the cancer, about her intention to return the ring. I didn't know about the letter." Michael had finished reading the correspondence, his expression somber. She wanted reconciliation, he said, looking at his mother. After 30 years of estrangement, Elizabeth reached out first. The study fell silent as Michael handed the letters back to Rebecca. Outside, rain had begun to fall, a gentle patter against the windows that seemed to emphasize the weight of decades of misunderstanding. "There's one more thing you should see," Rebecca said, withdrawing a sealed envelope from her bag. Unlike the other letters, this one was addressed and stamped, though never mailed. I found this separate from the others, in my mother's desk drawer. "It's addressed to you, Mrs. Thornton." Eleanor took the envelope with visibly trembling hands. "She addressed me as Eleanor," she noted quietly. "Not Ellie, not for many years. Would you like privacy to read it?" Rebecca offered, surprising herself with the gesture of consideration toward a woman who had shown her so little. Eleanor shook her head. "No, I think we've had enough secrets in our families." She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside, dated just 1 week before Elizabeth's accident. "Dear Eleanor, if you're reading this, I've found the courage to send it. Or perhaps I've passed, and someone has found it among my things. I received a diagnosis last month that has forced me to confront my mortality and with it, the way I've lived my life. There are many regrets, but none greater than the 30 years of silence between us. We were young when everything fell apart. The business, my engagement to Robert, our friendship. Too young to understand that some things are more valuable than pride or property or even perceived justice. By the time I realized this, the wall between us seemed insurmountable. I'm returning the ring that has symbolized our family's division for too long. It belongs with your family, as it always should have. My keeping it was never about the ring itself, but about what it represented. The final insult after your father's actions cost my family everything. But I was wrong to let an object, even one so meaningful, stand as a barrier to reconciliation. For all these years, wrong to let my father's sense of betrayal harden into my own stubborn pride. Wrong to deprive my daughter of knowing your family, especially after seeing the man your nephew has become. Yes, I know Michael has been treating me at the hospital. He has his uncle's eyes, but a gentleness Robert never possessed. I haven't told him I recognize the family resemblance, nor have I told Rebecca about our shared history. Perhaps that's my final act of cowardice. My time is limited, but it's not too late for our children to break this cycle of bitterness. Rebecca is so much stronger than I ever was, more capable of forgiveness. She deserves to know the truth about our families, about the ring, about all of it. I hope that someday, when wounds have healed, you might give her the ring, not as a reclaimed possession, but as a symbol that some divides can be bridged, that some broken things can be mended. With profound regret for the years lost, Elizabeth Eleanor's voice faltered as she reached the end of the letter. She folded it carefully and returned it to the envelope, her composure finally cracking. "I didn't know," she whispered, "about the cancer, about her recognizing Michael. I didn't know she wanted reconciliation. Would it have made a difference?" Rebecca asked, not unkindly, "If you had received this letter before her accident, before you took the ring from her finger in the hospital, would you have honored her wishes?" Eleanor met Rebecca's gaze directly for perhaps the first time. "I don't know," she admitted. 30 years of resentment doesn't disappear with one letter, but I would like to think I would have tried." Michael moved to stand beside Rebecca. "Mom, you've had the ring for 5 years. In all that time, knowing how much Rebecca searched for it, mourned its loss, why keep it from her?" "Because giving it to her would mean acknowledging our family's role in this tragedy," Robert interjected, speaking up for the first time since the letter had been read. "It would mean admitting that my father likely did defraud James's father, that our family's comfortable existence came at the expense of theirs. It would mean facing our own culpability. The truth doesn't change because we refuse to acknowledge it," Rebecca said quietly. "My grandfather still lost everything. My mother Still grew up watching her father fight a losing battle against your family. The only difference is that now, 30 years later, we have a chance to end this cycle. By marrying my son? Eleanor asked, a hint of her former sharpness returning. Is that what this is about? You've come to tell us the wedding is back on, now that everything is in the open? No, Rebecca said firmly. I've come because I needed answers, because I deserved to know the truth about my own history. What happens between Michael and me depends on whether we can build something new on honest ground, not on whether our marriage would symbolically heal some decades-old family rift. She turned to Michael, studying his face. The face she had loved and trusted, the face that had kept secrets from her for years. I don't know if we can move forward from this, she admitted, but I do know that whatever decision we make needs to be about us, not about our family's past. Michael nodded, pain and hope mingling in his expression. That's all I've ever wanted, he said softly, for us to be just us, not symbols in some family drama that began before we were born. Eleanor rose from her seat, moving to a small writing desk in the corner of the study. From a drawer, she withdrew a small key, which she brought to Rebecca. Elizabeth's studio, she said in explanation. I have a key because I helped her set it up back when we were young and still friends. There's a locked cabinet in the back corner. She kept her most personal work there, things she never showed anyone. She pressed the key into Rebecca's palm. I think you'll find the answers. You're still looking for there. For 3 days, Rebecca isolated herself in her childhood bedroom in her father's house, declining calls and visitors as she tried to process the seismic revelations about her family history. The only exception was Sophia, who brought food, listened, without judgment, and offered practical support without pushing for decisions. People are asking about the wedding gifts, Sophia reported, sitting cross-legged on Rebecca's bed. I've drafted an email explaining that the wedding has been postponed indefinitely and arrangements will be made to return everything. Rebecca nodded absently, her attention focused on the small key Eleanor had given her. She hadn't yet returned to her mother's studio to unlock the mysterious cabinet. Part of her feared what additional secrets might be hidden there. Another part feared that whatever she discovered might force her to make decisions she wasn't ready to face. Have you talked to Michael at all? Sophia asked carefully. He's texted, called a few times. I don't know what to say to him yet. You don't have to know right now, Sophia reassured her. Take all the time you need. But time, Rebecca was discovering, didn't necessarily bring clarity. If anything, the longer she avoided making a decision, the more her thoughts tangled around the central question. Could she forgive Michael's deception and move forward together? Or had the foundation of their relationship been irreparably damaged? On the 4th day, she finally returned to her mother's studio, armed with Eleanor's key and a determination to face whatever final revelations awaited her. The cabinet in the corner was small but sturdy, its dark wood surface free of the dust that had settled elsewhere in the studio. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, Rebecca found a collection of sketchbooks, journals, and a small wooden box. She withdrew them carefully, arranging them on her mother's work table. The journals appeared to be from Elizabeth's college years, filled with the ordinary daily reflections of a young woman. Classes, friends, social events, and increasingly mentions of James Martin, the handsome young lieutenant who had captured her attention. One entry, dated a week after Robert's proposal, stood out. I said yes because it was expected, because Ellie was so excited about us becoming sisters, because our families have been planning this match since we were children. But when I try to imagine a lifetime with Robert, I feel nothing. Not excitement, not joy, not even contentment. Just a grey emptiness stretching into the future. Is that enough? Should it be enough? And then there's James. When he smiles at me across the coffee shop, I feel alive in a way I never have with Robert. It's terrifying and exhilarating and probably temporary. the thrill of something new and forbidden. Mother would say it's just infatuation, that comfort and family compatibility matter more than passion in the long run. She's probably right. And yet, Rebecca moved on to the sketchbooks, which contained studies of familiar faces, young versions of Eleanor and Robert, her own father as a young man, landscapes of the lake and cottage. One sketch in particular caught her attention. A detailed drawing of the ring, with notes in the margins about its history and symbolism. Thornton family ring, passed from mother to eldest son for 3 generations. Ruby represents passion. Diamonds represent endurance. Ironic that I feel neither for the man who gave it to me. Finally, Rebecca opened the wooden box. Inside lay a collection of photographs. Not the formal portraits that decorated the walls of both family homes, but candid snapshots capturing genuine moments of friendship and love. Elizabeth and Eleanor as teenagers, arms linked, laughing at the camera. The two families gathered at the lake cottage, children splashing in the water while adults chatted on the dock. And most surprising of all, a photo of Elizabeth with both Robert and James, taken at what appeared to be a college party. Elizabeth stood between the two men, her expression conflicted even then, as if she already sensed the choice that loomed in her future. Beneath the photos lay a small velvet pouch. Rebecca opened it to find a simple silver chain, the kind that might hold a ring when it couldn't be worn on a finger. As she sat surrounded by these artifacts of her mother's life, Rebecca began to understand the complexity of the choices Elizabeth had faced, the expectations of family and tradition, the allure of true love, even when it came at a tremendous cost, the stubborn pride that had prevented reconciliation for decades, and finally, the regret that had prompted her mother's attempts to make amends before it was too late. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. No pressure. Just wanted you to know I'm here if you're ready to talk. Rebecca stared at the message, thinking about the parallels between her situation and her mother's. Elizabeth had chosen love over family expectations, but then allowed family loyalty to harden into decades of resentment. Rebecca now faced her own choice, whether to walk away from Michael because of the lies tied to their family's past, or to forge a new path based on truth and forgiveness. She called Sophia. "I need your help with something," she said when her friend answered. "Can you come to Mom's studio?" An hour later, they sat at Rebecca's kitchen table, a stack of blank wedding invitation response cards between them. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked, watching Rebecca carefully address each card. "No," Rebecca admitted, "but I'm sure I need to make a decision instead of hiding from it, and this feels right." The cards were simple, elegant, matching the original invitations, but with a handwritten note on each. "Dear Name, as you know, our wedding was postponed due to unexpected circumstances. After much reflection, I would like to invite you to a more intimate gathering on May 15th at Elizabeth Martin's art studio, where Michael and I will share our decision about our future together. Your presence would mean a great deal to us as we navigate this crossroads. Sincerely, Rebecca Martin." "It's not a wedding invitation, but it's not a cancellation either," Sophia observed. "It's an invitation to witness whatever comes next," Rebecca explained, "whether that's a new beginning or a formal ending." She addressed the final card to Eleanor Thornton, hesitating before adding a postscript. "The ring belongs to both our families now. Whatever happens between Michael and me, I think my mother was right. It should symbolize healing, not division." That evening, Rebecca finally called Michael. When he answered, his voice was cautious, hopeful. "I'm ready to talk," she said simply. "But not about the past, about whether we have a future." Elizabeth Martin's studio had been transformed. The dusty, preserved workspace was now filled with fresh flowers, soft lighting, and a small gathering of people who had once been divided by an old feud, but now stood together, uncertain but hopeful. Rebecca had spent days preparing the space. not just cleaning and arranging, but selecting specific pieces of her mother's artwork to display, paintings and sketches that told the story of two intertwined families across decades. The morning light filtered through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the assembled guests. It was a much smaller group than the church wedding had been, just immediate family and the closest friends. James Martin stood awkwardly near Robert Thornton, the two men exchanging occasional polite comments after 30 years of avoiding each other. Eleanor Thornton examined Elizabeth's paintings with an expression that fluctuated between nostalgia and regret. Sophia moved among the guests, ensuring everything ran smoothly, playing the role of both hostess and protective friend. And in the small adjoining room that had once been Elizabeth's storage closet, Rebecca stood in a simple ivory dress, not her wedding gown, but something new she had chosen for this day, whatever it might bring. She wore her mother's silver ring on a chain around her neck, while her diamond engagement ring remained in its box, awaiting her final decision. Michael knocked softly on the door. "May I come in?" Rebecca took a deep breath and opened the door. Michael looked both nervous and determined in his dark suit, his eyes immediately finding the silver ring hanging from the chain. "You're wearing it," he said quietly. "It feels right," she replied. "Whatever happens today, I wanted to honor what it truly symbolizes. Not division, but the possibility of healing." The past 2 weeks had been a journey for both of them. After her initial call, they had met several times, in neutral locations, away from both families, to talk honestly about their relationship, the deception that had undermined it, and whether they could build something new from the broken pieces. You ready?" Michael asked, offering his hand. Rebecca looked at his extended palm, remembering all the times she had reached for it without hesitation, when her father had been hospitalized with pneumonia 2 years ago, when they'd received the keys to their apartment, when they'd made the decision to marry. Trust, once broken, didn't repair itself overnight, but it could be rebuilt, one conscious choice at a time. She placed her hand in his. "Let's go." They entered the main studio together, and the quiet conversations hushed as all eyes turned toward them. Rebecca had arranged chairs in a semicircle rather than the traditional rows of a wedding, emphasizing that this was not simply a delayed ceremony, but something altogether different. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "2 weeks ago, our wedding day took an unexpected turn when I discovered this ring." She touched the silver band at her throat, and with it, the complex history between our families that had been kept from me. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat while James looked down at his hands. "At first I felt betrayed," Rebecca continued, "not just by the secrets, but by the realization that my relationship with Michael had begun on a foundation of half-truths and omissions." Michael squeezed her hand gently, acknowledging the pain his choices had caused. "But, as I've learned more about my mother's life, about the choices she made and the regrets she carried, I've come to understand something important." Rebecca looked around at the gathered faces, the two families that had been enemies for so long. "The past doesn't disappear just because we refuse to talk about it. Secrets don't protect us. They only delay the inevitable reckoning." She turned to face Michael directly. "When I left the church that day, I wasn't sure if our relationship could survive this revelation. I needed time to understand who I was, in light of this family history I never knew existed, and whether we could build a future on honesty after years of omission. I was prepared to lose you," Michael admitted, his voice thick with emotion, "and I would have deserved it. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping the past hidden, but I was really protecting myself from the risk of losing you if you knew the whole truth." Rebecca reached into her pocket and withdrew the diamond engagement ring. The assembled guests watched in silence as she held it between them. "I've made my decision," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I choose to move forward, not despite our family's history, but with full awareness of it. I choose forgiveness, not because the hurt wasn't real, but because carrying it forward would only perpetuate the cycle our parents lived through. She held the ring out to Michael. I'm not giving this back to you. I'm offering it to you, to place on my finger again, this time with no secrets between us. Michael's eyes shone with unshed tears as he took the ring. Rebecca Martin, he said, his voice steadier than she expected. Knowing everything we now know, facing our family's past and our own mistakes, I ask you again, will you marry me? Yes, she said simply. Not today, not immediately. We have work to do, trust to rebuild. But yes, I will marry you, Michael Thornton. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and a collective exhale seemed to pass through the room. Not an ending tied up with a perfect bow, but a beginning, complicated, messy, and real. James Martin stood, clearing his throat awkwardly. I think this calls for a toast, he said, nodding to Sophia, who began distributing champagne glasses. Once everyone had been served, James raised his glass. To Rebecca and Michael, who have shown more courage and wisdom than their parents ever did. And to Elizabeth, Eleanor added unexpectedly, her voice wavering slightly, who tried to end this feud before it consumed another generation. Rebecca unclasped the necklace holding her mother's ring and held the silver band in her palm. Michael and I have made a decision about this ring as well, she announced. Neither of our families will keep it exclusively. Instead, it will remain. Here, in my mother's studio, which we plan to renovate and use as our home. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the small gathering. The cottage at Lake Windermere is long gone, Michael explained. But this place, where Elizabeth created so much beauty, seems like the right spot to build our future. A place connected to both our histories, but not defined by them. Eleanor approached Rebecca, her usual composure softened by genuine emotion. Your mother would have approved, she said quietly. She always had the clearer vision, even when we were young. I found something else in her studio, Rebecca said, retrieving a large envelope from a nearby table. Plans she had drawn up years ago for a series of cottages along the lakefront. One for her family, one for yours. She never gave up the dream of reconciliation. Even if she couldn't bring herself to reach out while she was healthy, Robert joined them, studying the architectural sketches with professional interest. These are quite good, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. The property is still there, you know. The development never happened after the lawsuit. It's just empty land now. Perhaps it doesn't have to stay that way, Michael suggested, looking at Rebecca with a question in his eyes. She nodded, understanding his meaning. Not immediately. We have a wedding to replan, a relationship to rebuild. But someday, yes, I think my mother would like that. For her vision to finally come to life 2 generations later. As the gathering evolved into an impromptu celebration, Rebecca found herself standing between the 2 families that were now, against all odds, beginning to heal decades of division. She wore both rings now, the diamond on her finger, the silver band returned to its chain around her neck, symbols of a past acknowledged and a future embraced with clear eyes and open hearts. No more secrets, Michael promised, slipping his arm around her waist. No more secrets, Rebecca agreed. Just us, moving forward together.